Welcome everybody to our Money and Children webinar brought to you by the Money Edit and CISI. I'm Georgie Frost. Now, having kids, as any parent will tell you, is expensive. At the moment, with the squeeze well and truly on households, with rising energy costs, food bills, inflation, the cost of raising children is likely to be an even greater concern for many. Being armed with the right knowledge about what support is available and creating a financial plan will help enormously. So to assist you in both of those things and to discuss how and when to raise money matters with your kids, we have a panel of fantastic experts. Let me introduce you to them now. Kalpana Fitzpatrick is editor of the Money Edit. Welcome to Kalpana. Ruth Emery is freelance financial journalist and contributing editor of the Money Edit. Keri, certified financial planner and managing director of Broadway Financial Planning. And Sally Plant, head of financial planning at CISI. Welcome to you all. But let's get to it. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much. Ruth, I'm going to come to you first. Financial journalist, but also mother of two small children. Just outline to us the expense of raising small kids. Like, how much is it really? The cost of raising a child from 0 to 18 and the cost of childcare as well. What are we looking at? What are the figures?
Okay, so the Child Poverty Action Group did a study into this, and they track it every year from 0 to 18, the cost of raising a child. And this figure doesn't actually include housing, council tax, or childcare, but they estimate the cost from 0 to 18 is about £71,000. And for a single parent family, it rises to 100,000. So it is really expensive, and that cost has been sort of rising sort of over time. And then on top of that, you've got childcare, which, as we know, is a very big expense, especially in this country. And that's sort of the average across the UK for sending a child to nursery for 25 hours a week. So that's part-time, it's not full-time, is about £6,800 a year. And that cost has, of course, been rising as well. It's actually been rising 4 times faster than wages, 7 times faster than wages if you live in London. And if you live in London, the cost of childcare is a lot more, and especially as well if you send them to nursery full-time, which is what I did for both my children. So my children are 2 and 4 now. And both times I went on maternity leave, I came back and worked full-time. And then earlier this year, I became self-employed, and they don't go to nursery full-time anymore. But when they were full-time, it was about £1,000 a month per child. So it is really expensive.
Right. Well, we thought we'd start with the bad news and then we'll get into the better news of what you can do. So please bear with us, because I understand some of those figures are a bit intimidating. Ruth, before I ask Kalpana's experience, you mentioned there about your personal experience and what it's like for your young children. What were the most surprising things? What are some of the biggest issues that perhaps parents don't factor in?
I think you can do as much research as possible when you're pregnant or when you're planning for a family. But I think what a lot of new parents don't realise is that it's completely overwhelming once you've had a baby, both physically and mentally. So you might sort of, with all the best will in the world, be thinking of doing this and this and this, but actually you need to sort of cut yourself a bit of slack as a new parent. Because it's just a bit of a fog. I think one thing, we might touch on this later about child benefit. One good tip is that, once you've had your baby and it's sort of a fog, but it's also very exciting and people are congratulating you, asking you what the baby's called. So the thing we all know is to go register the birth. Once you've registered the birth, given your baby a name, the next thing to think about is registering for child benefit. And you get given all sorts of information at the hospital or wherever you have your baby, and lots of it will go in the recycling bin, and you'll just feel too tired, too confused to even think about it. But you will be given something about child benefit, but don't worry if you lose it or forget about it, because you can just look online. But yeah, register the birth of your baby, then register for child benefit. And yeah, I think that's my main tip there.
A great tip. I always think it's very surprising when you've just given birth to get a packet of information, along with stuff like vouchers, which perhaps you're not interested in, but some really useful information. It's the last thing on your mind. But anyway, Kalpana, your experience a little bit longer ago, your children a little bit older. But what did you find? And also, how prepared do you think parents are generally for the cost of having children?
Yeah, sure. I actually think that a lot of parents, when they're thinking about starting a family, what they do tend to think about is the psychological impacts. Like, oh, am I ready for this? But no one thinks about their finances. So no one here can argue that, children literally change your world, but they also change your bank balance quite a bit as well. So I guess for me, I was probably one of them. I hadn't thought about my finances. Shame on me being a financial journalist, but I did have savings, but hadn't thought about, you know, how I'm going to manage for the next few years. And I think luckily I was prepared without actually thinking about it. But anyone that is thinking about starting a family is really to think about that drop in income that you're going to have. So you might decide after maternity, or even maternity leave, that is a drop of income. So, you know, how are you going to manage on one income? You might not go back to work after maternity leave. How will you manage then? And it's just really, I guess, having an overall look at your finances and, you know, ask yourself, is this manageable? And if not, what can you do to make it manageable? And that might be just, you know, having an overall look at your finances, maybe cutting out expenses that you don't need and tightening that budget, I suppose.
I don't know how old you are, Kalpana or Ruth, and I'm not going to ask you because that's
I'm not going to tell you.
That's fine, but I'm going to say that you were at least 21 or something when you had a child, and probably no older because you don't look older. But the point being, and I'm going to ask Sally this, is there a difference between those who have kids young, so let's say in their 20s, and those who are looking at having children late 30s, 40s, and how they're managing their finances?
I think the impact can be slightly different. I mean, generally, often the term, this is obviously great generalization, but as you grow older, some people become more senior, and therefore potentially if you're in a partnership, the person that stays at work, and obviously now that may be the man or the female or however your partnership's constructed, but they might be earning a bit more than, say, when you're both in your 20s or 25s and one of you goes off. But interestingly, picking up on what was said before about being prepared for, I was quite prepared for the maternity leave bit. I think we'd done a bit of calculation about what that would cost for us to be off. But it's the longevity impact that we didn't really calculate for. So we certainly didn't calculate that when I first went back to work, we might be on a loss earner until those critical 3 hours free childcare comes into play. And we didn't, certainly my eldest is, you know, about to hit her teens. She thinks she's 15 already, but she's not. But she, certainly the impact of things like suddenly needing some extra learning help if they have learning difficulties, or if they suddenly decide they want to join a million sports organizations, the impact of those additional costs and the longevity of the need to plan for those, I certainly didn't appreciate when I was going into having children. I very much focused on that immediate need through maternity, but didn't look at the impact probably for the next, 5 or 6 years until we finished having children and they were in a school environment and I was back to working a bit more.
Which naturally leads me to invite Keri into the conversation, talking about longevity. How could financial planning help parents with the costs of raising children? And bearing in mind what Sally's just said there is, you don't know what you're going to do, perhaps, and Kalpana said as well, after maternity leave is over, whether you want to stay off, or it's a lot of unknowns.
Absolutely right. And I think obviously the others have already raised some of these points, but I think the planning part is something that is often overlooked. And I think it's really important to consider different scenarios and maybe work those through and say, well, what if I do, if the mother does stop work, how will that impact? What are the options available to you, and really plan those. I think the key really is to understand your finances and make sure that you're going into this change of life and lifestyle with your eyes open and have a clear and transparent idea of what your finances will look like. I think planning for that, and also Sally's already referred to longevity, but I think considering how life will look like in the future. So if whilst you are still financially buoyant or stable prior to the baby arriving, then consider what capital outlay might be required. Will you need a new car? Will you have to move house? Because that's where the better schools are. And so really think about the longer term impact of this huge change in lifestyle before just going straight into it, into the unknown.
Keri, do you have many parents come to you? Whenever we think of financial planning, we think perhaps it's for those who are a little bit older or have got lots of money or whatever. But do you actually have parents come with this issue?
No, is is the short answer. I think it's a real shame, and it's something that we're very conscious of, in that I think traditionally people have sought advice or financial planning advice that I offer as they approach retirement, you know, key changes within their lifestyle. It's definitely a sort of turning point, momentum where that will encourage them to seek specialist advice. But I think it's something where there is a lot of information available to younger people, and also a lot of sort of lesser cost information, you know, a lot of guidance and things like that, where people can still receive really good sound advice without necessarily having to incur higher charges or perceived higher charges from that point of view. But I think it is a demographic very underserved at the moment.
All right, let's get some tips and help and advice and all that. Ruth, what help is there available? We've touched on it, but I want to get into this in much more detail for childcare costs. And let's not forget people who are self-employed and all those sort of different demographics.
Sure. So there's tax-free childcare. So a lot of people might have heard of childcare vouchers, but those aren't available anymore to new parents. So if you're just having a child now and thinking about going to nursery, your only option is tax-free childcare. And basically you get some free money from the government, so you do get some help. It's a 25% uplift, so you create this tax-free childcare account on Gov.uk, and so if you pay in £80 of your money from your current account, and then the government will top it up with an extra £20, and that's capped over a year at £2,000 in terms of how much the government will help you. So if you're sending your child full-time to nursery, you'll spend more than that, but you will get £2,000 from the government. And to be eligible, you need to be working and earning at least the national living wage, but you can't be earning more than £100,000 a year, and your partner can't be earning that much either. And if they are, you're not eligible for any sort of government help towards these towards nursery or childminder fees. So if you're earning, say, £20,000 and your husband or your partner's earning £110,000, then you don't qualify. But if you and your partner are both earning £90,000, you do qualify. So it's slightly strange, but those are the rules. And then two things to point out, as you mentioned, self-employed. So self-employed are eligible. And crucially, if you have just gone self-employed, like myself, I went self-employed this year, the government gives you a 1-year grace period. So you don't need to worry about earning that minimum like threshold. They'll sort of let you off if, you know, if you're setting up a business, your income might look a bit sort of unstable. So you get a 1-year grace period. And then also another thing that people often think with tax-free childcare or childcare vouchers is that it's just for spending on nursery or a nanny or childcare, but you can use it when they're in school. So for tax-free childcare, you can use it up until age 11. And you can use it for things like breakfast club and after school club or holiday clubs. We've got half term coming up. And actually, so my son just started school last month, and you get given all this information from the school, and, you know, I've got a nice invoice for how much these after school clubs are going to cost, and nowhere on it does it say you can pay with tax-free childcare. So I have been banging the drum at the school gates telling other parents, did you know you can pay with your tax-free childcare? Because actually my husband, when we paid like the first little invoice, he just paid it straight with our debit card. I was like, what are you doing? You should pay from our tax-free childcare account. So now I'm in charge of that, and I'll be paying that way.
Kalpana, I mean, do you think there's enough information out there about navigating what help is out there?
Well, as Ruth has clearly just pointed out, absolutely not enough help. But there is one thing that I really wanted to touch upon, was the child benefit, which Ruth mentioned earlier, which so many people are caught out by this, and it comes to your earnings. So essentially, I'm looking at my notes because the figures are really, really, really confusing. So before 2013, anyone could apply for child benefit, no problem. But since 2013, new government rules, as you might expect, a very complicated one, which basically says if you earn, or one partner earns at least between £50,000 and £60,000, you have to pay 1% of that child benefit back in a higher income tax charge. So you have to do a self-assessment. Earnings over 60k, you have to pay pretty much all of it back. I say pay all of it back, it's essentially a tax charge, and you have to fill out a self-assessment. So what a lot of people are doing, a lot of parents are doing, is just saying, actually, we won't bother with that. But by not bothering about that, is you are essentially missing out on national insurance credits that then go towards your state pension. So Royal London did some research around this, which said about 100,000 parents were missing out on this, stay-at-home mums, for example. And if you're working, you can pass NI credits to grandparents who do childcare for you. So I would say, like, you know, if you should still apply for it, tick the box to apply for it, but you don't necessarily need to take the income and you don't have to go through the admin headache. But equally, if you haven't done your tax return, do that, because they will come after you. And what's interesting about, I mean, I've written about this extensively, and people always come up to me and say, I had no idea about this. So again, you know, it's something that, you know, you really need to be aware of, and also, you know, something if you speak to advisors should flag as well.
I've got some questions on this. We're going to move on shortly to talking about money with kids, but I do want to get some of these questions at the moment. I don't know if anyone knows this. Gary Smith is saying childcare tax help, very interesting. Is there a website for that?
Yeah,
Ruth?
if you basically just Google, it's just called tax-free childcare, and if you Google that, then like most of the search results will be Gov.uk pages, and they're very clear about like the eligibility and what you get and so on.
From Rob, tax-free childcare only accepted if the childcare provider is set up for it. So you may need to badger the provider to set up with HMRC first before you can pay through this. Ruth,
yeah,
I think that's true. But I think in addition to Ruth's point, you know, there are quite a wide group of people who will now accept that. Everything from sort of mini rugby clubs sometimes do to definitely holiday clubs. So it is definitely something to pursue when you're looking for additional childcare or additional activities. Definitely worth asking the question.
Perhaps one for Keri here. This is from Jackie. I think that the planning aspect also needs to be flexible. I've seen many pregnant mums saying they will definitely return to the workplace full time. Then once the baby is born, they have a change of heart and don't want to rush straight back in, but then find they can't afford not to return to work. In my experience, that situation causes guilt and upset.
Absolutely identify with that. You know, my daughter's 8 now, so I went through all of that. And I think it does sort of take me back to my opening point about the fact that try and sort of consider the different scenarios and work through those and see which will be possible and, you know, could be affordable to allow you that option of, you know, a change of heart once the baby is there, and once you've maybe decided going back to work, certainly full time, may not be for you. So yeah, absolutely.
And from Chris, my sister is a part-time student, topping up her skills as a full-time nurse. Despite CTB, she doesn't seem to get a lot. There needs to be more for frontline workers, key workers. Well, I don't think that we really have any say over the policy of that, but I'm sure we'd all agree that that might be something to consider. So keep the questions coming in. Before I close on this section, Ruth, I just want to ask you, day-to-day costs. I mentioned at the start there about energy bills rising, food bill rising, inflation rising. It's looking very gloomy and doomy, especially coming up to Christmas. How can we cut down on some of those day-to-day costs of our kids?
So I think a good tip is to buy secondhand. It's really easy to buy secondhand nowadays, whether it's in a charity shop, there's loads of apps, you know, on social media, or even just getting things for free. I just gave away a load of free stuff, actually, loads of plastic stuff like a potty and a nappy bin and things that, you know, I didn't want to, you know, kind of single-use plastic, but I thought definitely somebody else can benefit this rather than just putting it in my bin. So buying secondhand, and if you're when you do have a baby, there are a lot of costs involved up front, you know, at the beginning of starting your family. So something like getting a 0% credit card, that's what I did, and spreading the cost over a couple of years is really helpful, and obviously making sure you don't pay any interest as well. And also see what help your local authority offers too. Because they may have some support for new parents on low incomes, or even just generally some support for new parents. One example is reusable nappies. A lot of councils give you reusable nappies. It could be worth like £50 or £60 or a voucher to spend. So definitely do your research to see sort of what freebies and what help is out there.
Absolutely. I have to say, Chris has just messaged in chat. I do like this one. Rewrap presents from ages 0 to 3. They won't know or remember. That is marvellous. They're more interested in the box and wrapping anyway, aren't they? Kalpana, yeah. Any tips from you?
I would say generally have a look at your overall household bills. You've already mentioned that, you know, household bills are going to increase for a lot of families by a few £100s each month. energy, etc. So if you haven't reviewed your household bills, now is the time. So your broadband, your mobile, etc. You'll be surprised, even your mortgage, because you could save like hundreds, if not thousands, if you're on the wrong deals. So I think that is a big money saver that, you know, I know it's very busy when you've got young children, but it's a must.
Yeah, some good financial advice for all of us. Okay, so let's talk about talking about money. One of the issues we seem to return to again and again is when and how to talk to your kids about money, teaching them about money and financial education. So, Ruth, I don't know, what are your kids, 1 and 3? Are you talking about mortgages and pensions yet?
Not quite yet.
No?
So they're actually 2 and 4, but
sorry.
No, it's fine. Sorry to correct you. So, well, actually, my daughter's almost 3, so it's all going very fast, much faster than I'd like.
We'll be on to ISIS soon, don't worry.
Yeah. So how do I talk to them about money? Well, so for my daughter especially, who's almost 3, a lot of it's through role play. Like, she loves her toy kitchen, and she loves pretending to be a shopkeeper and loves to pretend to be a cafe owner, and she has 2 cash tills, and actually, like, a few weeks ago I bought her some more plastic coins and banknotes. So she likes sort of interacting that way. So the money is sort of kind of through her play. I'm not doing it like explicitly saying like this is a mortgage or like this is money. She's sort of just becoming comfortable in that way. And when we go shopping in the supermarket, both my children, they sort of fight over like who's going to use a self-service checkout and who's going to pay with a contactless card. And I think it's often about like, if they, for my son who's 4, he's just started school, if he sort of brings it up in conversation, then that's a good time to discuss sort of certain money issues or financial issues. So last night I'd ordered some clothes online and they arrived, like clothes for the kids, and my son was excited to see this new jumper, and he's always obsessed with what age it is, and it was age 4 to 5, but he saw this sticker on the front that said 3 for 2. So he was like, "Mummy, why have you bought like age 3 or age 2?" So, and it was bath time, and I was thinking, I don't want to like just get in the bath, but then I thought, no, why don't we like discuss the special offer and talk about, you know, spending money, and that, you know, it was a good deal, but obviously you need those clothes. It's not about being sucked into this kind of commercialism anyway, but sort of spoke to him about it in an age appropriate way. And because if I try and just tell him things, he's often not listening and he's not focused, but he's very curious. So when he asks me a question, that's when to really sort of, okay, great, you've asked the question, let's have a chat about it. So that's what we do. And then also, just more widely, we often go to the library, and we often go to a charity shop as well to buy things or drop things off. And so it's not sort of exclusively money related, but just generally, you know, thinking about, you know, we go to the library to borrow books, and we don't always have to buy new. And isn't that a nice thing that, you know, we could borrow the books and then we give them back, and another child could enjoy those books, or, you know, we've finished using these things, we can give them to the charity shop. So it's sort of, you know, in a more gentler way, sort of in introducing that topic and that discussion, and also obviously being good for the environment as well.
I'm glad you mentioned, there's lots in what you said, thank you, Ruth, but I'm glad you mentioned about contactless, because when you sort of said, oh, you know, coins and banknotes and all that, Sally, I've got to ask you, the way that we handle money is, well, it's very different to the way our parents did, and doubtless the way that our kids will in the future. Whenever we talk about, you know, learning about money, it's having the little pots and using cash, and it's a great way to budget. But if that's not how we're going to be using money in the future, is this all a bit irrelevant?
I think the physical nature of having cash and children seeing cash be exchanged for goods is a fundamental learning point, as is someone put in the chat about the piggy bank. You know, the idea that they physically go and do a job that's visual, they go and do the job, and then they get some money and they can put that somewhere to save. They're all very good lessons. But for my children who are 8, 10 and 12, we got into a very sloppy habit in the pandemic, where obviously I was paying for everything contactless because most shops wanted to be contactless, and the immediacy of buying things on Amazon and it being delivered the next day really meant that they weren't seeing where the money was coming from. They had not really much idea. I mean, my oldest one has her own bank account actually, but the younger one wasn't really seeing anything to do with money. It was just to do with a plastic card or shopping online. So I think as we have moved forward, we need to actually educate them on the point of a card. And the CISI actually for Financial Planning Week this year has built, as part of the toolkit, a presentation to be delivered in schools that is called What's Behind the Card. And it is aimed at that sort of 7-8-year-old group, 7 to 9-year-old group. There is one for sort of older children as well. But because, for example, the Money Advice Service research showed that all the key habits around money are actually formed between the ages of 5 and 7 years old. So you can imagine during the pandemic, those children, whilst those habits are being formed, are just seeing tap, tap or Amazon. And they're also not necessarily seeing parents go out to work again. So that concept of earning money and then utilising that money to pay for goods has obviously been a message that could have been lost in some households. So I think the lessons now moving forward is that really it's more important than ever to talk to your kids about money because they're not visually seeing the money, and to explain the difference between debit and credit. So show them the card and show them where that says the key things. And when you're going through online purchases, explain to them, you know, I mean, my daughter did actually have a little Amazon session by herself, but didn't realise that, you know, that was actually money coming out of an account. So it's really important to show them that pull through of where that money comes from and the importance of earning money, and that's how you get to spend it.
Kalpana, we have financial education in schools now, and you can say what you think about that. I'll leave it to you. But the role that parents play, do we need to? Do we parents need to discuss? I mean, a lot of parents, I think, will probably be quite lacking in confidence to think about teaching their children about money. Or is it not so much about teaching the facts about money, but what it does, the way your mindset around it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'd say parents actually play a really key role in this. As Sally just pointed out, you know, their minds start thinking about money from quite a young age. So start as young as possible, just start talking about it. And I say that because from my experience, my parents used to talk about money all the time. And I just started picking up the importance of that. And I kind of do that with my children as well. As for financial education in school, you know, it's a bit of a mishmash with other subjects, so I don't think it's really enough. Will our kids come out of school knowing about mortgages, pensions, investing? I don't know. How to start a business? I don't think so. But do the parents have a lack of confidence? I think the main thing is step away from seeing it as a maths lesson for your children. Don't even make it. Just have a conversation and be open about it. I think a lot of us probably grew up to say, well, we don't really talk about money, it's private, etc. Don't make it private. I'd say, you know, just be open, talk about it, talk about bills, talk about earnings, whatever you want to, as long as they're picking up those messages. And I know we touched upon about all the different ways you can teach your kids about money, but one of the things also that we found in the pandemic was my oldest one, who's 12, started to become quite aware of scams. Like he just didn't stop trusting people. So it's also just teaching them about things like that. So, you know, it's not okay to trust every text message that comes through to your mobile. And, you know, he's got his own bank account and, well, his prepaid card, and just, you know, kind of giving him a bit of knowledge here and there as and when you can. But I'd say the main thing is, you know, it's not a maths lesson, and just keep that conversation flowing, and you'll be surprised at how much they pick up, because kids are curious and they will ask questions and they will pick things up.
Talking about picking things up and going on what Sally just mentioned earlier about the impact of the pandemic, I think a lot of parents might be going through some real difficulties. I know when I was young, my parents, and they won't mind me saying this, had a lot of money worries, and it impacted on us as kids. Whenever they discussed money, it was an argument. So as a result, I've learned to not talk about money, because I think it's going to, well, ironically, I do for a living, but in terms of my private life, because I think it will result in an argument. So something you have to really work through. Keri, I imagine you see a lot of the psychological impact of what I guess our parents were like around money on us and the way that we act with money now. Can we break that, is what I'm asking? And can we do better with our emotions around money?
Yeah, I do think it's hard. And I think, you know, as Kalpana has already alluded to, you're sort of creating this behaviour and psychology from a really young age. And therefore, those are really long established habits to break. And I do think it's hard. And I think as parents, the best sort of lessons that we can perhaps provide our children with is a good education in money, to try and break that cycle of maybe what we were used to. I mean, I tend to deal with sort of most people who are retired and therefore sort of fall into the baby boomer demographic. And they are very much of the sort of, you know, don't spend the money. It's got to be saved. It's got to be saved for something. And my question is always, why you say, you know, what's the point of saving it? What's driving you? And I think it's about having those sort of more deeper conversations with yourself and with how you portray that to your children. That's really essential. And I think it's because that's the legacy that they're going to be left with and will then pass on, no doubt, into the future. And I think, as sort of most of the other panelists have already said, having the ability to have honest conversations about money, whether it's good or bad, you know, if things are going to be tough in the run up to Christmas, then have those conversations. You know, I remember my parents saying, there's nothing for Christmas this year. We just don't have any money. We have enough to pay the bills. And I sort of got that. You know, I'm one of four and we just accepted it. It was not great, I have to say, but we accepted it and gone with it. And I think maybe sort of not necessarily being harsh in your delivery, but being able to be honest about money will help to create a healthier situation going forward.
I mean, there was an interesting study actually by the American Academy of Pediatrics on this point, and about the importance of being realistic with your children. So not enabling them to grow up with a false sense of security if it's not there, and utilising that to teach them the difference, that basic lesson between need and want, and trying to turn that lesson into a good thing to equip them better as they go through their childhood and you know, into adulthood, and creating that as a key lesson of life, really.
If you yourself are incredibly worried, Lucy's written, I worry that if I talk about bills and earnings, that they will worry that we can't afford things, which isn't the case. For some people, it will be the case. It's hard to know where the line is between not letting them worry that we have money worries, or potentially going too far the other way, letting them think there is no issue, exactly what Sally was saying there. But it's very difficult, isn't it? And at what age do you start doing it, and how do you approach it? Especially when, I appreciate you're not a psychologist, but you know, when so many emotions are going through, Ruth, how do you broach that?
Sorry, Georgie. So how do you broach what, just talking about money with your child?
When you are so talking about money worries, I think, in a way that doesn't overwhelm them, doesn't give them a false sense of security, doesn't make them worry, those sorts of things. Is there an age to do it? I mean, should you hide if you have money worries in some regard? Is there an age in which you should mention it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, for my daughter, she sort of perhaps is too young. For my son, I would talk to him about it if we had sort of money worries, in terms of if he wanted to buy something, which I felt that's too expensive or we can't afford it. At the moment, actually, we're having a really expensive month at the moment because my daughter's about to turn 3, and I think we've just sort of overstretched ourselves a little bit. So yeah, I think it's just being really honest and open. And actually, I did an article recently for the Money Edit where I talked to a range of children about.
I was going to ask you about this. Yes, what are they advising us to do?
Yeah, so some children, like, rather than us giving them the advice, like, what money advice would children give their parents? And it was brilliant. So some of the responses, I mean, it was really refreshing. A lot of the children who might have only been like 7 or 8 knew about like the concept of saving for something, and they knew that you should keep your money safe as well. I mean, some of them said, you know, you should put it in a bank, and I said, why in a bank? And they said, well, there are guards and they'll keep your money safe, and you know, all these nice little ideas that they have. And I asked my son, and he was the youngest person out of the range of children that I asked, and he said, he sort of looked at me and he said, wow, money doesn't grow on trees. And then I thought, oh, he's obviously got that from me, and I've probably been a bit flippant, like probably if he wanted to buy something, I'd be like, well, money doesn't grow on trees, you know. So it was just sort of a reality check for me, thinking, oh, I need to talk to him properly about these things and not say about money growing on trees, which isn't very helpful at that age. But he did also say that he wanted to save his money. He sort of understood the concept of saving. He said he wanted to buy a bus, a real bus, not a toy bus. He's saving up to buy a real bus. Okay. But I think also, like, you know, when they get given money, so if my children get given money for their birthdays, and my husband's half Chinese, so we get red packets of money for Chinese New Year for the children. So to talk about, and my son, I'm sure he'll be losing his teeth soon and he'll get a visit from the tooth fairy. So again, like actual physical money is just a great sort of a good thing to bring up that conversation about what are you going to do with this money, and would you like to save it, that sort of thing.
Okay, I'm going to ask some comments, so bear with me. We've had lots in the chat, so thank you very much. Natasha says, I'm about to launch my own wealth management practice, and financial education is really important to me. Do you think, as well as organising visits to school to talk to children about money, that it would be beneficial to also organise a session with parents to help discuss how to approach this and answer any of their questions? The floor? Anybody? Keri, you're nodding?
Well, I don't think you can say no to financial education, can you, at all? Like any form.
I was just about to say the same thing. I think,
sorry, took the words out of your mouth.
No, not at all.
The merrier is what we're saying.
Absolutely. The more education, the better, you know, from any angles and from as many resources can be made available. So, yeah, great idea.
There's a lot of talk about JISAs. I'll give this to you, Kalpana. Gary says, good option, but the money is fully locked in until 18. After which case it's totally there, so make sure you do teach them about money. Good idea, good way for the kids to see how money works and all that.
So a great way to save for your children, but there is you can save up to 9,000 in a junior ISA, but that doesn't mean you should put 9,000 into a junior ISA. As you've just pointed out, it is locked until they're 18, and they legally own that money when they're 18 to do with whatever they want with it. So I would say it's, in my opinion, like it's really important to make sure you're financially secure first before trying to top up that junior ISA for a child that's not going to get that money until they're 18. And as someone once said to me, easy come, easy go, right? So you don't necessarily want to, you want to teach them all the good money habits before they get that money. I have junior ISA for my children, and the way I tend to top it up is being in an Indian culture, money is quite a normal gift to give to people. So when my children get given cash, I just tend to put it all into their junior ISA, and they've been building that, you know, since day one. And that is how I build their savings. Obviously, I pay into it as well, and they're very aware of it. They know it's growing, how it's invested, etc. That's a conversation they have with me sometimes, and sometimes they're not bothered. But it's, yeah, so yeah, I'd say the main thing is just make sure you're financially secure, because if there was an emergency in life and you needed access to that cash, you don't have access to that cash.
Ruth, a lot of love for the charity shop books. I'm also a big fan as well, reading at a fraction of the cost. A lot of mention about piggy banks, Natwest piggy banks, HSBC piggy banks. I'm assuming we don't mean the literal terracotta type variety or plastic. Terracotta might be better for the environment, but that's for another podcast, another webinar. Kalpana, where I'm going with this is apps and technology. We mentioned it in regards to sort of cash and all that sort of thing, but how good? Give us some that it could be quite useful that you've heard of or you've reported on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's actually loads of apps and prepaid cards, which also come with loads of tools to help children manage their money. So we've used Go Henry, for example, Rooster Money, there's Hyperjar. Some of them you do have to pay a small fee to use them. Essentially, you top it up and you can see where your child's spending as well. So like my son has one, and bless him, he does actually come and ask me permission every time he wants to use it. He goes, can I use it? And it costs this much. So I've obviously told him off about not using it too much, but so, and they also have loads and loads of tools. There's so many resources out there. I think the industry is doing what the government hasn't done for our children. So I would say it's dependent. I mean, something like Rooster Card, your child as young as 6 can start using it. And there are loads, and we have written about these as well. And they come with like loads of budgeting tools, and I would say, yeah, use them, and talk to your children about them as well. It's just giving them that little bit more responsibility as well. I think that's important, to let them learn from their mistakes sometimes, but this is in a controlled way.
Ruth, I mean, I used to have a little, I think it was Abbey National red savings book. Don't know if it did that much, but my parents did go through it with me. We've discussed JISA, premium bonds as mentioned here, apps. I mean, there's a lot of choice here. What do you go for?
Yeah, I used to have the NatWest piggy bank as well. So will my children have like their own little piggy banks, and they like putting money into it, and they also both have like a little purse as well. And sometimes my son says he'll go to the shop and like buy me something, which is very sweet of him. So I think having something, and I used to have a building society passbook as well, which was interesting, and I'd go there every weekend. I think it's more difficult now because banks and building societies aren't as open as they used to be. You know, their opening hours, it's hard to go on a Saturday. So I'm not sure about that, but yeah, definitely. And with Kalpana was mentioning about junior ISAs, definitely having that conversation. If you've opened a junior ISA for your child, you need to be talking to them about it, and they can start managing it from age 16. And if you've decided to put it into stocks and shares junior ISA, they can manage the investments, and that's a really good opportunity to talk to them about how the stock market works, you know, dividends, compound interest, that sort of thing. So you definitely, if you're getting a junior ISA, great, you know, it's tax efficient and so on, but just remember they automatically get that money at age 18. There's nothing you can do about it. They might be given, you know, thousands of pounds. So you need to, in tandem, have been talking to them about it and sort of instilling some good money advice along the way, especially in those teenage years.
Indeed, you do. Rob showing some love for the Abbey National book as well. Lovely to see. Before I let you all go, I want you to leave us with one piece of advice that, Keri, do you have children? Excellent. What? It's the only one I just realised. The only one I don't think I've asked you if you said that. That you wish you had known beforehand. So we'll start with Sally. What's the one piece of advice that you would give to someone else that you wish that you'd had that probably wasn't stuffed into a packet when your kids were first born?
I think it would be realistic. Like, be realistic. Be realistic about going back to work. Be realistic about your own expectations. And also make cash part of, or money part of, your daily conversation. Don't suddenly sit them down and be like, all right, now we're going to talk about money. You know, try and make it present. So be realistic and make money present would be my two.
Excellent. Can I just also point out before I ask Keri the same question, thank you very much, Will. If you do give your kids a physical piggy bank, I suggest use a clear jar so they can see the money grow as it tops up. Great advice. I had a big whiskey jar, but that's again for another conversation. Keri, same question to you.
I think I would be saying to my daughter, reach for the stars, basically. You know, don't let money inhibit your goals and aims and desires. You know, aim for whatever you dream of, and then with a realistic front on it, but don't, you know, I wouldn't want my own views on money to curb her goals and dreams.
Ruth, the one piece of advice you wish you had been told?
Well, we've been talking about talking to your children about money, but I think it's really important to talk to your partner about money as well, especially if you're having a child, because, you know, the mother, she may well be taking an extended period of maternity leave, and you need to perhaps rely on your partner for money. So before, you might have had very separate finances. Even if you're married, you might be quite separate, but once you have a child, you need to start thinking about money like as a couple, as a family, and talking to them about it. And I think if you do have a really open relationship with your open relationship in terms of money with your partner, then hopefully that will be, you know, then your children growing up will see that you know, you talk about money as a couple, you talk about money as a family, and it's sort of just you know, an everyday conversation, and they'll see that you're honest with your, you know, the parents are honest with each other, and you can be honest. Anyway, I think it would all just, it works well if you can all talk about money, essentially.
Indeed. I will skirt over the open relationship part you just said as well. Kalpana, finally to you.
Yeah, I would say, you know, my dad gave me loads and loads of good advice around saving for money, but he didn't speak to me about investing. So for me, I wish I'd known more about investing. It's, you know, a great way to make your money grow. And it's something I know that I'm going to really talk to my kids about quite heavily as they, you know, start absorbing it a bit more. I just think it's really important to know that, you know, there are better ways to save sometimes than just putting it in a cash account.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much, Ruth, Kalpana, Keri, Sally, and to everybody. Lots and lots in the chat box. I'm sorry I didn't get through all of it, but thank you so much for joining us. Just a reminder, this is part of Financial Planning Week.